Okay, welcome back to Parenting and Mental Health. You all know me. If this thing will shift, maybe it won't. But I'm Dr. Court, and as we've talked about in the past, there we go. Now it's working. Um, where I am a parent. I am by no means an expert, but I will share with you the research about the different things that I have seen. It does seem like I'm having some slow issues, so we'll hopefully work through those. Um, I'll close some stuff, see if that'll help. Um, okay. So ground rules as usual. Uh, you all already know these. What we talk about in here stays between us. Everyone, assume noble intent and use inclusive language. And we're all active listeners while we're in here. Boy, this thing's going to be fun for me today. It's extra slow. Wow, it is really slow today. Okay, well, today I wanted to talk about back to school. I thought this would be um, a really good topic. It would help us, um, you know, it's right around the corner. Most of us have kids starting school the beginning of next week, which means for a lot of kids, they have to get up earlier, which means for parents, we have to get up earlier. We, it means navigating a new routine. It's a lot of transition. So I wanted to talk through some of the things that'll be really helpful for starting the new year. Um, and we'll talk a little bit towards the end about kind of spotting if your kid's not doing well. Sometimes we miss signs because we're around them all the time. But it'll be good for just, and I'm going to go through by developmental stage. So some things to prepare for the new year. We're going to talk a little bit about establishing routines, creating boundaries, setting rules. In fact, I was thinking about this today for my own kids. Um, going back over rules for bedtime, like what time is bedtime now? Like how much screen time are they allowed to have now that we're back in school? During the summer, we were pretty loose with screen time, and now that they're back in school, we're going to have to tighten it back up. So, kids always need those reminders, especially if during the summer you were trying to be, less strict. You let them stay up late, you were on trips, whatever it is that means less strict in your family. Um, Reminding your kids when they're going back to school that, what the rules are, what you expect of them, and, kind of go through what the consequences are for things like that is really helpful. Any transition, as we know as adults, anytime there's a transition in life, right? A starting of something new, even if the kid has been to school before, your child's gone to school before, it's going to be a new teacher, a new classroom, um, you know, a new school for some kids. There will be new kids possibly. So there can be a lot of anxiety and fear around the new school year. If your child in the past has had trouble in school, a lot of that might well back up. And so kind of talking about that, opening dialogue, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but just recognizing that any type of transition, any type of change is fear and anxiety inducing in all of us. Um, Not really going to talk about traumatic experiences tonight. We are going to talk a little bit about social interactions, and not so much social interactions between their peers, but your social interactions with your kids. And we'll get into that. And then we'll talk a little bit about, being able to see or notice, develop, for different developmental stages, whether or not your child's struggling a little bit, and what we can do to kind of help with that. Okay. So, first thing I wanted to talk about is establishing a routine. For many parents, we're all already very well versed in establishing a routine. I just really want to like put a stamp on it, an exclamation point. Routines, habits, are so important for kids. They're important for adults too. I can't stress enough to all adults and people that the more that we have habits, once we create a habit, we're actually reducing our own cognitive load, which means then we're opening up our brain to be able to learn something new. That doesn't just suddenly start to happen as an adult. That's happening for kids too. And even though their cognitive load tends to be a lot lighter than adults, they're not worried about so many different things. They still have a cognitive load and they're learning so many new things. The more we can make routine for them, it's going to make them have the space to learn new things, right? It's also just my classic metaphor is if you put a bunch of people out on a field, sorry for the sports, analogies, but if you put a bunch of people out on a field and say, okay, go play, like play the game, and you don't tell them the rules, you don't tell them where the boundaries are, you don't tell them the goal of the game, they're going to get frustrated, they're going to get mad, they're going to act out, they're going to break the rules. It's not going to be fun. And all too often as parents, we do that with our kids. We're like, okay, be good. Well, what does be good mean? We have to define our terms. So again, going back to the routines, we establish routines which include really clear boundaries, right? A really clear bedtime. Maybe and this varies. I'm not going to dictate what a bedtime should be. All I will tell you is, in the medical world, they say school age children should get 9 hours of sleep a night. Okay. That doesn't mean they start the bedtime and from the start of the bedtime routine, they have 9 hours until they need to wake up. That means in bed asleep for 9 hours. Does every kid get that? Probably not. Do we want to aim for it? Yes. Um, so, so knowing your child, I have unfortunately opposite children. I have one child that gets up really early and will go to bed. I mean, he'll go to bed on his own now at this point. He's 10. I have another child that would probably stay up all night if I let her, and has trouble in the morning. So navigating and getting those two on the same routine during the school year is a little bit challenging. And we do it. Do I treat them differently on how I set up that routine? Absolutely. Um, so you have to know your own child and know what to expect. We've all gotten the bus schedules, hopefully. It's on for Anne Arundel County. It's already on the website. I'm sure it's on there for Calvert County too. So we already know that. We know our bus schedules. If we utilize a bus, or what time the school starts. Really work backwards from those times and figure out how much time does it take your child normally to eat their breakfast? How long realistically does it really take for them to get dressed and brush their teeth? All of these things, all of these things that we establish as a routine will help your child gain confidence, actually. It helps them feel in control. Um, and it reduces anxiety and stress because they know what's happening next. We can relate to that. When we don't know what's happening next, we get stressed out. So all of these things are why we want to establish a routine. There are some great books on habit. One is Atomic Habits by James Clear, and another one is The Power of Habit. Blanking on that author's name, but they're both great books, and they both go into a lot of scientific detail on why habits and routines are so important. And in fact, they go into, why, uh, billionaires and like what we would consider the most successful, richest people in the world, they have excessive amounts of routines and habits in place that they do almost to a ritual point, because it lightens their cognitive load and then they're able to focus on being creative and their business or whatever they're doing. So it works the spectrum from all the way from small children and toddlers. We know routine's important for them, all the way up through adults. So one thing that might be kind of fun is if you're establishing a new habit or routine, every habit has the same pattern. It's a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. And that's over time. Like those are in order. So why do I tell people this? Because sometimes there are some habits we developed that we don't even know how we started them. And then we try to establish other habits. We have a really hard time doing it. We don't understand why. This can help you. A cue can be music. It can be an alarm. It can be a buzzer on your phone. It can be a parent saying, hey, go do this. It doesn't matter what the cue is, but it's important to kind of think about cues that will then, that cue will then, if you're consistent with the cue, that will then trigger the brain to have the same reaction. This is Pavlov's dogs, if you know that, right? The bell goes off, the dog salivated. Why? Because they knew when the bell went off, they were going to get fed. So they started to salivate when a bell would be rung, even if they didn't get fed after the habit was established. You can do this with your kids and yourself. Okay. So the cue has to be consistent and the response has to be consistent, right? So those are the things you control. The craving is what the brain does. And that's what you're hoping for so that your child develops that habit. And building rewards are much stronger in terms of building a habit than punishment. If you establish a cue and you're trying to reinforce the habit by using a punishment, it rarely sticks. It's a lot harder unless the punishment's super severe, and we don't want to go there, right? Like that's not something as a parent we really want to go to severe punishment. So really think about rewards. The funny story I tend to tell people, I like read every potty training book on the planet when I was my eldest, was going through that stage, and I was in a rush because I was pregnant with our second. I did not want to change two sets of diapers at the same time. I was adamant about it, didn't want to do it. So I had to come up with a reward that was big enough for my son. I found one. It was monster trucks. They were about this big. They were metal, and they were like $10 to $15 each. If my son pooped on the potty, I gave him one of those monster trucks. Did it work? 100%. We were really consistent. But a week in and about $70 later, I realized I needed to then stop weaning him off of getting that reward because I was running out of money. But he was potty trained in a week. It was beautiful and it worked, right? And I was able to wean him off and he continued using the potty. So it really can work. You just have to figure out the right reward and you have to be super consistent. So for those of you, that like to be science geeks, that's the science behind setting up a habit. And habits are part of a routine, right? Okay, there we go. All right, so how do we do that? So the habit loops over there on the side, the cue, the craving, the reward, the response. Wanted to take a second. I want you to take a minute and think about something that you already have made a habit. And I want you to take a minute, whatever that habit is, and I want you to really think about what is the cue for that habit. It can be a good or bad habit. Okay. I'm not being picky. Sometimes the bad habits are easier to identify, frankly. What is your cue? What causes the craving? What's the reward and what's the response? I just want to think about that for a second. And when you think you have something, we can talk about it. So I can see you. Do you have one that? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Huh?
Did you ever have it?
Oh yeah, the vaping stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I have it.
So what's the habit?
The vaping.
Okay. Oh, vaping is a great one, right? So does the vape have nicotine?
No, CBDs.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Just more of a habit shifting because I had other habits.
Right.
So
Okay.
I shifted into this because it's lesser of the evils.
Absolutely. Yeah. No judgment here. It's a great one because when you're talking about any type of substance, whether it's food or others, there's a really clear associated reward, right?
Mhm.
So that one's easier. So what's the cue for you? What usually cues you to want to vape?
Oh, it's a number of cues, just like a smoker would.
Yep.
Um, uh, you want to leave the situation for a minute, and you need a reason why. I'm going to go over and do this. Um,
Good one.
um, you're bored, something to do.
Yep.
Just you think you're stressed and you think that you need to relax. Well, another reason to
Yeah.
help.
So
Um,
lots of cues, right? Which probably means that habit is pretty strong.
oh yeah.
Yeah. How about the craving? Like um well, you kind of talked about the cue and the craving, right? The triggers are, it sounds a lot like they're mostly socially induced, right? Either you're bored, you want to get out of a situation, like, so this is an easy excuse to excuse yourself, maybe
Mhm.
stress, right? And then the craving, what's the motivational force behind the habit? Um, does it calm you down?
Psychologically, I think it does. Just
Yeah,
because, just like, I thought it did when I was smoking. It would calm me
yeah,
down. It was the whole ritual behind the act is what calmed me down because it was a friendly place.
yep,
So to realize that it's the friendly place, that's your kind of reward because now you feel comfort into that whatever. And then, with smoking, you find a camaraderie. You at least have something to talk about with someone else.
yeah. Yeah, there's a great, I don't know if you were ever watched the show Friends. There's a
Mhm.
great episode where Rachel isn't a smoker and she's working, and she goes out with the smokers and pretends to smoke and ends up like trying a cigarette and hates it, and just because her boss and all of her other coworkers would go out and smoke together. So she felt left out. And she
Mhm.
wanted, and they would like make business decisions while they were smoking. So yeah, there's so many different rewards to that particular. That is a great habit to pick because there's so many cues, tons of cravings, right? And you mentioned that they're not all just like physiological, some are psychological, right? You crave wanting to not be bored. You're giving yourself something to do. You crave the social interaction, you crave the getting away, all of those things. And then
And
the reward calms you down. It, like you said, it takes you to a happy place.
well,
Um,
the other thing is so the social acceptance when it comes to it, because a lot of your bad habits are also socially unacceptable habits. So you have a tendency to be able to hide them better and carry more self-control over them because of fear of shame and stuff like
yeah,
that. But with cigarettes or vaping, it's just that other people are in the same boat as you, and you realize how common it is. And so you have the social acceptance behind it, which makes it a lot easier to do.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and you're mentally not compromised, say such as drinking and stuff like that, where you're mentally compromised. With the vaping, you're not necessarily mentally compromised by it.
yeah.
So now it's a little bit easier to get away with.
I
So
agree. Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. That's such a good one. Um, so I want to take that. So that's such a good example. And now I want you to kind of shift that into thinking about, the aspect of your Monday through Friday, the school week, and the kids that you have and yourselves, and what are some aspects of your day that are going to be very consistent, and probably those really consistent things are things that are out of your control, and you
mhm.
can shout things out if you want, things you're thinking of. I'm not
Trip to work, the trip home,
yeah,
out of
right.
control. Got to
Commute to
do it.
work, commute home is going to be pretty consistent. The bus schedule, right,
Yeah.
is hopefully, assuming we have bus drivers, is pretty consistent, right? When school starts and ends is really consistent. So, if you use before and after care, when before care opens or when aftercare ends, super consistent, right? So you have some things you have no control over, but are also extremely consistent. Some other things that can be built in, um, is even looking at your child's schedule. Most of them have, a very consistent, schedule of their courses. And that can help when we talk later about some things that could be issues or problems, that can help later if you notice that, every Wednesday, your child is super anxious. Well, what's going on? If they're anxious Wednesday morning, what's going on at school that day? And you can probably look at their schedule and figure it out, right? And then you can work from it. So also understanding what's consistent. When you have more consistency, you can really hone in on where there are issues or where the issues are coming from faster. Um, so So some things that can help you and your child prepare for those constants. Are there any things that maybe a routine you'd like to set up, or something that you've tried that hasn't worked well, or some routines that you'd like to set up at the beginning of the year that would be helpful to, again, for all of the reasons we talked about in the last slide, to help your children be successful in school, to help reduce your stress level because your kids know what they're supposed to be doing. Can you think of anything you'd like to add in or
Um,
start?
I've been trying for the last couple of years actually getting them consistent to do come home, have their snack, and do one chore, whether it's sweeping, picking up a toy, something like that, and then starting their homework, which like last year was like iReady, where they had to do like 10 minutes or something a day, and sometimes they like if would get home, then all of a sudden, if the TV happened to already be on, they just beeline that way and forget everything the rest of the day. And there was like no follow up on anybody else doing it. So it was like that was very aggravating because then I'd get home and nothing was done. And I didn't care too much about the chore as much as I did the homework where I had to check that all the time.
Yeah. So what might be really helpful, and we can kind of walk through this, is, you know, setting up really clear and strong cues, or like your husband mentioned, having multiple cues for the same thing, right? Well, the getting home is a cue. That's a natural one. Like, what other cues could be set up to remind them that these are the things they need to do?
Right.
And then, yeah.
Yeah,
And
can't help
then what are the
that.
rewards that you put into place, right? So really kind of, you can sit and maybe evaluate. And then again, what you're talking about with the TV is a competing habit and, cue and reward system. So
Yeah,
maybe if there's a way, you can't, take the TV off the wall. I mean, you could, but,
yeah,
are there other ways, like, can the TV be unplugged, or can you have a lock code on the TV or the computer so that you're creating more tension or more friction between getting that reward that they want, and then, maybe having the time to get them, reeled back in, thinking about things like that, where you reduce the tension or the friction for the things that you want done, that pattern. And like you said, mostly it's like getting their schoolwork done, um, and then increasing it for other things. So some things to think about there, but yeah, maybe try using that cue, craving, reward, response, like figuring out how you could play around with that, where it might be helpful um, to get that pattern that you want. And maybe where you start is just trying to get one of them in place, so they get home and they have their snack. I mean, you can try all three, but really focus on one of them. So maybe
yeah.
you really focus on the schoolwork one. And then once that's a habit, then you can stack habits and you
Okay.
attach that habit to another one. For instance, people do this all the time. They know they're going to be driving to work every day. That's already habit. That's already a ritual. So they add on, when they get in their car, they've added the habit that they put on an Audible book, and that's a new habit they want to have. And so then that becomes a routine that they're already listening to something every day they go to work, and they stack their habits. There are a
Mhm.
bunch of others you can do, um, but that's just an example.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of in that vein, ways you can support the routine, right? And if you can get your kids to do the routine, that's going to add accountability. It makes them feel organized. It makes them feel responsible. Like, kids want to do the right thing. I mean, we all inherently have that. I have yet to meet someone that very purposely and intentionally wants to be malicious. Yet to meet that person. There might be a lot of people I've met that do bad things, but it's not intentional, right? They start wanting to do the right thing. So if you can help them create a habit that helps them to do the right thing, they feel really good about that. So we talked through some of this stuff, right? Setting an alarm. Um, some people use like the egg timer alarms. Other people use clocks or watches. Um, in my house, we have those, Alexa dots everywhere. those things have been amazing. And we set up routines and we've done different ones for different things. So I have one that goes off every night at a certain time and says, kids, it's time to get ready for bed. The beauty of that is those things are tied into our televisions. So it stops whatever you're watching and it comes across the screen and it says, kiddos, it's time to get ready for bed. So in the summer, that's really helpful because I was a little more lax about screen time, right? It also starts, we have a different routine that every morning. So our bus, I think, leaves at 7. We figured out we need about an hour to get our kids out the door. So at 6 a.m., the music goes on in the kitchen and it's like happy, upbeat morning music. It goes on, it's at a level that everyone can hear it in the house. It's another routine we set up and it plays for an hour. When that music goes off, by the end of last year, the kids knew we did it about 10 minutes before they need to get to the bus stop. The kids knew when the music went off, like that was their time. They were like, oh no, the music's off. By the end of the year, they were like running around, scrambling to get their shoes on. Like they knew they had to get out the door. It took a while for us to get there, but it was something that was, the cue was strong for them. They like music. It was easy. It wasn't me screaming at them. It didn't have that same, like, it didn't have a negative emotional attachment, right? Um, Automatic lighting, right? Turn a light goes on at a certain time every morning, or lights go off at a certain time every night. Um, the giving enough time, I kind of talked about, you have to play with your kids and figure out where their window of time is. I did have one client I was talking to about back to school this week, and they were like, "Oh, I refuse to get my children up before a certain time." And I'm like, "Okay, well, can they get ready in that amount of time?" "Oh, well, I yell at them every day about it." Okay, well, you can't change the start of the school time, but you can shift, the bedtime morning routine. So work with what you can shift. Even if you're frustrated about what you can't change, you can't change it. So we're stuck with the school times that we have. So we have to work with what we can change. So checklists. I know a lot of parents that put checklists like on the inside of the door of their kid's bedroom or checklists in the kitchen. I think we've talked about this before, right? And family calendars, having family calendars, or next to a family calendar, having a list of expectations. This is what I expect. If you do all these things by this time, then you get this. So not just telling them what you expect, but telling them what they get for doing what's expected. A lot of parents get frustrated with that and they're like, oh, well, I shouldn't have to reward someone for doing something good. Well, remember, the they don't know what, like we have to teach them what we expect is good and what we expect. And then we have to reward it until it does become intrinsic or it does become a habit. Then you don't need the $10 monster trucks anymore, right? And they'll still do it. But for a while, you got to do that so that they then feel like it becomes part of them. So hopefully you can see this. This is kind of shifting from routines to opening up dialogue about the school day. This is something that that I can give copies of if you come, coming in for a session. But this is just something that's a good idea. A little worksheet that kids can fill out. For your littlest, it might just be drawing a picture about the school week, like what went well, what didn't. Have them draw a picture. For older kids, they can fill this out. They talk about, what their favorite breakfast that week was, what their favorite lunch, dinner, snacks. How did they connect with people? When you have kids that are struggling with other kids or teachers or whatever, asking them how they connect with others is really important because then they realize that that's the point and not just like, how many of us have asked a kid, how was your day at school? Fine. How was practice? Fine. How, fine, good, okay, that's it. You're getting no information. So these questions are a little bit more helpful, right? What activities brought you joy? I ask my kids a lot, like, what made them laugh today? And it's pretty funny to hear their answers, actually. It gets to be fun. And then if you're consistent about asking these questions, they will start to answer them when they get in the car with you or when they get home. Guess what made me laugh today? And then they tell you, because they're expecting you. So these are things that you can create as a habit if dialogue about the school day is important and you feel like, and I would suggest it is, because what happens is if you start that now, then when the child is struggling, you've already opened that dialogue with them, and they're going to be way more apt, way more likely to share the bad stuff if you just share the good stuff now. So that's just a little suggestion. I will go through these quickly. These are signs, developmentally, if you think things are going poorly. For younger kids, it's nightmares, trouble sleeping, aggression, tantrums, all the typical stuff. And trouble following a schedule or a routine. So if you're seeing, if any one of these is happening individually, probably maybe not a thing, but if a lot of these are all happening at once, then you want to dig deeper. When we get to the older kids, it can be a change in sleep, a change in their eating patterns. They're suddenly worried about things they've never been worried about before. Maybe they socially start shutting themselves off. It can be a change in activity. They might have unrealistic or like an imbalance of what they're worried about. So suddenly, I remember a long time ago, I had a client's little brother got really worried about germs. What we found out a lot later was he was getting bullied. And the germs were just kind of this side effect that was what he could control, and he could control washing his hands. So he did it excessively. To the point where he was like, his hands were so dry and cracked. It was so frustrating. But it took us a long time to get there and figure out what that was. There we go. Going to the teenage years, obviously the same kind of stuff, more threatening, risky behaviors, things they might write down, or a sudden substance or substance use, a sudden change in friends can also cause it. All of these can be kind of signs that something else is going on, and starting that dialogue early kind of helps prevent that. Okay, so back to the younger kids. This is another great worksheet that could be good, and even though like I wish we were live, I could give you these worksheets to take home. The questions for this are great, and this is something you can do this week with your kids before school starts. And this is kind of addressing to the kid that you're about to go back to school, and even though we all as parents are like, school's going to be fun, right? It may or may not be, and they might be excited to see their friends but worried about other things, and we don't know. So asking them to think about the 3 things they loved about school last year. That will help get them excited about, right? And then having them think about all the different people that contribute to making their day a good day at school, right? And so like there it says like the people that take care of them. Really having them think through that, because that one I've noticed like kids struggle a little bit more with. They're like, oh, my teacher, my principal, and they're like, well, what about the janitor? Like the janitor cleans all the spaces and makes sure, what about the lunch ladies? What about, in our elementary school, we have like the safeties or the 5th graders. They help make sure the little kids like get to their classroom. Really having them think about all the different people that contribute to making their day a good one. And that's a good place to remind them that there is a school counselor. And they're there for them, right? Asking them who makes them laugh. Like who do you go to for a good laugh? It might be one of their teachers, right? It could be a friend. Who they go to when they have a problem, if they need to cry, where they can go, who they can go to, when they're feeling lonely, who do they want to play with? Like having them think through all those things can be super helpful. And then for the younger ones, they might miss home a little bit. And so what can they do? This is back to a cue, right? They feel lonely. So what can they do to help, lessen the loneliness? For some kids, it might be some kind of token from home that they're allowed to have at school, like maybe like something on their, pencil case, or an eraser that, is like a special shape or something. Or maybe it's just something. I knew parents that would like write a cute note on like a napkin that they would put in their lunchbox, and every day it would be like, I knew one mom that would like do designs and like pictures, and you know, that was like their way to let the kid know that they were thinking of them, and you know, they would be home soon and everything was okay. So whatever it is, you know, you can kind of create something for your child if you do think that they are missing home or feel lonely. This helps them kind of connect back that it's okay. All right, so that was a lot. Stop sharing. Hi.
Hi.
Questions, concerns, thoughts?
I actually like those worksheets.
Yeah. So the second one, was the first one? The first one, I have to, I'll make a note to remind. Oh, the first one actually I think came from um the crisis text line, believe it or not. They have a whole little worksheet. It's like a whole year of those sheets that you can do. The second one that was kind of more artsy is called Big Life Journal. Um, that company I love. She started out, it's actually a counselor that started this company, and she started by making these little journals for kids that, you know, the parent and the kid could do together. I love them. I think they're great for all kids. There's one on like kind of grit and resilience, and it talks about growth mindset, and they have all sorts of different ones. But that worksheet's from her, and she has all sorts of great worksheets. And she's just getting more and more resources. So Big Life Journal, I'm a huge fan of. I get nothing for saying that. I use them for my own kids and have used them. Um, when I was teaching younger kids, I actually used Big Life Journal to start like homeroom stuff. Because they just, you know, the questions were good, the worksheets are colorful, and I use them in session with kids sometimes too. So yeah, Big Life Journal always has some really great ones, but and I can see if I can get them to you. I think. Yeah. If you remind me next time we speak, I can try and send them to you.
Okay.
Or we might be able to email it. I'll have to look. Yeah. Anyway, any other questions?
So for that four part where it's the cue and so we we do have like our morning routine, and you know we did write it out and stuff like that, but how like effective would you find like in the afternoon, like their routine right now in the afternoon is to come home, shoes away, the bag. Would that be considered a cue, or is that more of the routine than a cue?
It's a
No,
cue.
that's great. They're all cues. So yeah, the fact that they come home and they take their shoes off. So you're already doing like habit stacking, right? Like they get
Yeah.
home, they know to take their shoes off. And if you're really consistent about, you know, even the order that they do them, sometimes that order doesn't matter, but sometimes it can be helpful of like, okay, I know what's next. Maybe the first few days you actually have a specific space where they can do their work, like if it's in at the kitchen table or wherever, right? And it's set up and ready to go when they get home. That can be helpful to stacking that cue of like the next thing I want, like having the snack on the table by pencils and paper so they can do their schoolwork. Of
Okay.
course, more than likely, this is where it's always frustrating for especially elementary age kids. They don't always have homework. So trying to have something for them to do that is associated with school, even if they sit down and they have to, you do like one of those the other worksheets that I had that just talks about their day. Even if you have them do that every day, then when they do have schoolwork, that can be attached to the talking about your day part. And it keeps them from, you
Veering
know,
off.
veering to like, okay, I don't have anything to do, so I can go watch TV. Right. Um, and so, yeah, so those all stack and can help kind of keep the kids focused on that stuff. And like I said, if you put the snack out, like that's actually coupling habits. If
Okay.
it's a snack they really like, right? You get to eat the snack while you're doing this thing, right? Um, but you don't get to eat the snack, like the snack you don't get to have if you're, you know, if you go over and watch TV. And a little harder, but if you put the snack by where they would do their schoolwork, then that can be really helpful.
Okay.
Um, yeah, little things like that. Um, and the more consistent you can be at the beginning, the better. It's hard for all of us. I mean, I know we tried last year to do that, and then at one point, like randomly in the middle of the year, my daughter was like, "Oh, we're not doing homework anymore." I'm like, "Wait, what?" I actually sent an email to the teacher. I'm like, "Is this true?" Like, because then she didn't have the same cue as our son, because our son would come in and he knew to do his homework. Now she doesn't have it, so she became a distraction, right?
Yeah.
So we had to quickly come up with something else for her to do during that time, which because we were doing it retrospectively, it's a lot harder to keep her on it. But if you have something in advance, like every day you're going to fill out this worksheet, you know, regardless of whether you have homework or not, then everyone's kind of like
On
doing
something.
it. Yeah. So that would be let me know how it goes.
Yeah.
It's always a work in progress with kids, right? Like every kid's different and what they respond to. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I'm a big fan, huge fan of routine and habits because I think it makes life so much easier.
I'm
Um,
gonna try the music thing because I'm like that in the morning. It's like they just start walking around and then they feed off each other, and it's like, what are you doing?
right. Yeah, that one was huge. And that was like it's pretty easy to set up routines, like I said, in Alexa, but you can do it other ways, right? Like even if you're doing it manually, that works too. It
Yeah.
just, I mean, it worked so well that we did it during the summer too. I just shifted the time so that the kids still heard the music in the morning and they knew to get up because they had to go to camp. Like,
Right.
still worked. And all week we've been shifting that time back by like 15 minutes every day. So by the time we get to the school day, they'll be
Yeah.
back to this time they need to wake up. So,
That's what I was trying to do this week.
yes,
Kind of getting them in bed around 8:30, and then the wake up has been really hard this week for me. So
I know. I'm with you. I'm so with you. I'm like, oh, I've got to get up like an hour earlier next week. Okay. But yeah, yeah. Anyway, well, thanks for joining me again.
all right, thank you.
And
I know I probably won't be able to make it next week. I don't know if Ken will be able to, but
okay.
yeah, because with the schedule changes,